The first time you write a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist, 2001, you're coming out, you got some data, you're confident. But now you're a bullseye, you're a target, right? And everybody wants to prove you wrong, which forces you to go and get better at your arguments. You make your arguments stronger. What areas at first when you wrote your first book, where were some of the leaks where you're like, oh, okay, these guys do have a good point. Let me go look at this a little bit further. Oh, okay, I didn't think about this one here. Oh, no, I am right in this part. Because I know the whole thing when you went back and forth, they wanted to say that your book was an opinion piece. And then I don't know how many people wrote against 267 people appealed to say, I can't believe you're doing this. And then eventually they let your book stay. You ended up essentially winning the fact that the book stayed. But what changed from the first time you wrote that book where some areas you knew you had to do even more research in?
So it's a difficult question because fundamentally, I think I came in as a newbie. I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot of stuff that I think actually held up really well, but there was a lot of stuff I didn't know very well. I think the big difference is that now I get a lot more of the backside of all those stories. I think most of the data that I told already back in 2001 was correct simply because I wasn't telling, I wasn't saying, hey, I found this. This was what the international organizations were telling us. I've never disputed, global warming. I think the UN climate panel is the right ones to take that conversation. But what I actually did was read them. When you read most of this stuff in the newspaper, like you just mentioned, AOC telling us we only have 12 years left. Look, this is the public sort of PR version of the story. What is actually the background is politicians asked the UN climate panel, the IPCC, what will it take to stay at below 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is this made-up target, and it's basically incredibly difficult to do. So the UN came back and said, if you want to do this almost impossible task, you have to do almost impossible stuff. You have to change your entire economy, the entire global setup in 12 years. That's how the 12 years ended up. It's basically saying if you want to do something impossible, you've got to do it in 12 years. Now, that's a technically true statement, but the UN climate panel never says you should do this. They're simply saying if you want, it's a little bit like saying what would it take to stop all traffic deaths? About 40,000 people die in traffic every year in the US. What would it take to stop all of it? Well, one suggestion would be to set the speed limit at 3 miles an hour. Nobody would die. But of course, there's some enforcement issues, and I think maybe a lot of people would not feel particularly comfortable about that. But it's true to say, if you want to get rid of 40,000 people dying every year on the road, one solution could be to set the speed limit 3 miles an hour. But it's not actually recommending that. Nobody would want that, and it doesn't take into account we have other things that we like as well, like being able to get to our family in time.
Can I follow up on that? These days, I think that there's such a craving from most people for just universal truths. Like, what is actually the truth? Don't give me a narrative. Don't give me your opinion, whether it's with COVID, whether it's with inflation, whether it's, are we in a recession? Are we not? Like, everyone wants to push their narrative. I think what would be helpful is what are the resounding universal truths that everyone can full on agree upon? Like, forget about your opinion, buddy. This is the truth of this matter when it comes to climate. Like, you've been pretty clear that climate change is real, man. Some of it is man-made. What is people on the left, the right, up, down, what are the most universal basic truths that everyone agrees upon from there? I'm
going to give you first the thing everyone agrees on, then what most people agree on, and then maybe we'll get into it. Yes.
Amazing.
So everyone, pretty much everyone agrees we're emitting CO2, that's his main greenhouse gas, because we burn a lot of fossil fuel. CO2 wraps around the world, makes the world a little bit more sort of holding back infrared radiation, so it actually heats up the world a little bit. That's what everybody agrees on. That's the basic sort of greenhouse effect, or what we call global warming, or maybe even climate change.
So CO2, check, not good.
We're putting out CO2, and that causes the world to warm up.
Copy that.
It's also universally accepted that if you change the world's temperature, that will have a cost. Look at Miami. and look at Boston. They're both pretty good cities to live in. They've certainly been adapted. Lots of air conditioning in Miami, lots of heating in Boston. Both of these places would be off if the temperature gets warmer or if it gets colder, because all of the infrastructure, all the buildings have been built to that particular temperature. If it gets warmer, Miami will have to put in more air conditioning, and Boston will have to put in more air conditioning. And likewise, if it gets colder, you'll need to have more heating in both of them. So it's fundamentally costly when the weather or the climate tracks off from what it used to be. That's the main reason why global warming is a problem. Global warming is a problem because we track off from what our infrastructure is adjusted to everywhere on the planet. It's not the end of the world. A couple of degrees temperature change is not suddenly going to make Miami or anywhere else unlivable. It's just simply going to present somewhat of a problem. Now, everybody would agree with the first part of it, but now I'm tracking into what most climate economists try to focus on. So climatologists, all the natural scientists, they look at what will happen when you put in more CO2 and how much does the temperature go up. But economists then try to say, what's the total impact of that? What are all the bads and ups, the positives of that? Remember, as it gets warmer, we'll also be able to produce more food. We'll have more growth days many places in the world because CO2 is also a fertilizer. We'll also have more green stuff. We'll probably be able to produce more. Overall, when you add up all of this, it's a negative. That's why it's a problem. But you need to add up all of it. Most economists will tell you that the impact of global warming over the century will be in the order of, say, 4% of GDP. So it means that by the end of the century, if we do nothing about climate, it'll feel like we're 4% less well off than we otherwise would have been. There's two important...
It's almost like inflation for the world.
It's like a couple, 1 or 2 years of recession over the next 80 years, which is why most economists say it's a problem. It's not the end of the world. This is not 100%. Remember also at the same time, and this is a little hard to hold in your head, but the UN estimate that we'll be much richer by the end of the century. Just like, from 1900 to 2000, the world got incredibly much richer. The UN in a standard scenario estimate that each person on the planet will be 450% as rich as he or she is today. That's an astounding and wonderful achievement. That means, especially the world's poor will be pulled out of poverty, lots of great things from that. Because of global warming, we will not be as rich. Instead of being 450% as rich as we are today, it'll feel like we're only 434% as rich. Yes, that's a problem. No, it's not the end of the world. Things will be much better, but slightly less much better. That's why I'm arguing, and most climate economists are arguing, this is not the end of the world. Actually, most other things that happen in the 21st century will probably be much more important, like, for instance, our pension problems. Most countries in the world, especially the rich world, are not saving enough for for people when they get old, and all the other problems. Infrastructure. How do we deal with the fact that the world is aging, so we have ever fewer young people supporting ever more old people? And there are lots of other challenges for the world. Those are probably going to be much bigger.
I just learned that term, by the way. I've heard of climate scientists. This is a new term, climate economist. What's the difference in those two people?
So the climate scientists are the ones who run the computer models. They all natural scientists. They'd be like physicists sort of thing. And they basically look at all the natural effects and try to estimate the natural variables to say, if you put an extra ton of CO2, how much warmer does it get? That's what they ask. The climate economists will say, all right, so temperature goes up by this. We take that from the from the climate scientists. How much will that impact our economy? How much worse is that going to make you?
Who's more important? Are they both obviously equally important?
You need both, but unfortunately, we've had very little conversation. So look, one of the climate economists, his name is William Nordhaus. He's a professor at Yale University. He's the only climate economist to get the Nobel Prize in 2018. So these are important people. Yeah. But when you talk to most of the climate conversation, it's all natural science. And that's wrong because you need to actually say, how much is this going to affect us? Take one thing that's incredibly important for Florida. Sea level rise. Obviously, as temperatures rise, water, just like everything else, expands. And that means you get higher sea levels. That's also absolutely uncommon.
I live in Miami. I see the sea level. The streets get flooded. It's insane. They've raised the roads significantly over the last few years.
So we absolutely will have a problem with sea level rise. Now, the question is this going to be unmanageable or not? And the simple answer is no. We know how to do that. And a good example is Holland. Holland basically has 40% of its area below sea level, and yet most people live there fine. If you've ever flown into Amsterdam, they're one of the few airports in the world, I'm sure, who on their website proudly point out that they are the only major airport that was formerly a site of a naval battle. But you fly in there, there's no water. You don't have to worry about this. And they've fixed the whole thing. So the total cost of all that Holland has done over the last 50 years is about $10 billion. So, it's not nothing, but it's not a big thing for a rich country over 50 years.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.